Hey everybody. Hey, listen, I'm making this Mexican casserole. I've posted about it a few times, and every time I post it, I get a ton of comments, people wanting to know how to make it. So I thought that I would make a little video here to post and show you how to make it. So here we go. Stand by. What we got here is a pound of ground beef and a pound of Mexican chorizo sausage. The first thing you do is just brown that up, and after it's browned, drain it in a strainer and rinse it with hot water to get all the grease out. So that is step one. Okay, so here's our meat mixture. It's been drained and rinsed with scalding hot water to remove as much of the grease as possible, and also rinsed out the pan with hot water too, so there's not a ton of grease left in the pan. Now we're going to double check and make sure that we're done there. Okay, now return this back to the pan. And some of you might be wondering why I'm doing this. Well, rinse it out with hot water. Little garbage disposal. Let the hot water run for a minute. Just fine. Okay, now here's what we're going to add to this. We're going to add a whole can of diced tomatoes and green chilies. I'm trying to hold my cell phone and do this at the same time, so it's a little awkward. And this is an entire jar, 16 ounces of taco sauce. You can use hot, mild, medium, whatever kind you want. And I've got a little bit of salsa left in here that I'm going to just use up and throw in there too. So, sorry about the shakiness. Okay, so I need to stir this up and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is just add 1 packet of taco seasoning. Now here's a sad note. If I'm using 1 pound of ground beef unseasoned and 1 pound of chorizo sausage, which already has the seasonings in it, if you're not going to use the sausage and you're going to use 2 pounds of just regular ground beef, go ahead and add 2 packets of the seasoning. I'm only adding 1 because I don't want to over season it. And I'm going to add about 3/4 of a cup of water or so. And I'm going to stir that up and then move on to the next step. Stand by. Okay, the next step is we're going to add an entire can of refried beans into this. I use fat-free refried beans in this, and the reason is because normal refried beans have lard in them, and you know, this casserole has got a lot of meat, and when you see how much cheese goes into this, you're going to realize that there's just no reason to add lard into it also. So I use refried beans that are fat-free, but you can use whichever kind you'd like. So I need 2 hands to do this, so stand by. Okay, now we've got our beans in there, and I've also reduced the heat some. It's just kind of simmering, and you just kind of want to, you know, get in there. It looks kind of gross, I know, but just sort of get in there and smash all this up and just get all this nice and blended. And let's go ahead and do that, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, now we have our meat, bean, and tomato, green chili sauce mixture. Everything is good and blended and rinsed, so there's minimal grease. So the next thing we're going to do is just let this simmer for a couple minutes, on medium-low heat, and just stir it for a couple minutes and make sure everything is good and blended, especially get those beans nice and distributed. And next thing we're going to do is go ahead and start putting this thing together and get it baking. Alright, you want to preheat your oven. If your oven is pretty accurate, set it to 350. Mine runs a little bit cool, so I set mine to a 355. Now we're going to go over here and we're going to start putting this thing together. You needed a whole bag of tortilla chips, any kind you like. You can use the cheapest ones you can find, and because here's what you're going to do with them. You just kind of poke a hole in the bag, and then literally just you do that so the air can come out, because what you're going to do is literally just crunch them up into nothing. So you don't want it to be powder, but you want it to be pretty small pieces. And something else you can do, you can actually use Fritos for this, which is pretty good. For me, it's a little salty, but some people like it. Okay, now we've got our crumbles there, and what that's going to be, that is going to be the crust, and it's also going to be the middle layer, basically like where you would put lasagna noodles, because this is like a layered casserole. So let me lay that down, and I'll be right back. Okay, I put about, I would say, I don't know, 2/3 or 3/4, something like that. I don't really measure anything, but most of the chips. But you want to leave some in the bag because you're going to need to do another layer, but the second layer doesn't have to be as many. And so I also need to let you know you need to use a big baking dish for this, because it's very thick and it makes a huge casserole. You can cut everything in half, all the ingredients in half, and you know, if you're only feeding, you know, 2 people or by yourself or whatever, cut everything in half and make it a smaller one and bake it in a 9x13 baking dish. But this is a really big baking dish. So that's what we're doing, because I'm feeding 4 or 5 people tonight. So, alright, and so what we're going to do is, right on top of your layer of chips, just start distributing your meat mixture, just like you would make lasagna. And let me do this and I'll be right back. Okay, here's our first layer of chip crumbles, and then about half of the meat mixture. Now we're going to talk about the cheeses. The cheeses, you can use any kind of cheese you like. I'm using 8 cups of cheese. It's a lot of cheese. For the first layer of cheese, I'm using 2 cups of this and 2 cups of that. When I do the top, it's going to be 2 cups of this and this. So it's a combination of a bunch of different cheeses. But right now we're going to put these 2 on the middle layer. And let's go ahead and do that. Here's the first completed layer. Now this is essentially half of the ingredients in there. So you could put this in the oven and bake it for a half an hour and have a great casserole. However, I'm going to put a second layer of everything on top of it and make it twice as big. So what we're going to do next is put another layer of chips on top of that cheese. So as you can see, there wasn't as many chips left in that bag, so you just use the rest of them. If you want to use 2 bags of chips, you can. That might make it a little dry, which, by the way, I wanted to tell you, if you want this meat mixture to be pretty runny, because this stuff really can't be too wet, because it's going to sit and it'll dry, it'll thicken, and especially when it's left over. So don't be afraid if your meat mixture is too runny. It's not going to be too runny. In fact, this mixture here might be just a tad dry. It should be the consistency of thin chili, but this is kind of a really thick chili. So I'm actually thinking I'm going to add a little bit more water to this before I put that second layer on. So let's see what happens. Stand by. Okay, added a little bit more water. This is more like what it should look like, a little thinner. So, okay. Basically, we're going to add the rest of this on top of this, and then we're going to top it with 4 more cups of cheese. And let me do that, and then we'll see what the finished product looks like. Stand by. Okay, this is the whole thing put together, and I just dashed it on top with a little smoked paprika, and now we're going to put it in the oven. I'm putting mine in on 355 because mine's just a little cool, and I'm going to bake this for 45 minutes. If you're doing one half this size, you can bake it for a half hour. Alright, well, let's bake it and then take a look at it when it's done. Okay, here is the finished casserole, and normally I'll serve this with it's a sweet corn cake and Spanish rice and black olives, guacamole, and sour cream. And so there you go. Dinner is served. Enjoy the video. Sorry about the shaking. Let me know how it turns out if you decide to make it. See ya.